So I just wanted to welcome everyone to our economic update. Thanks for coming along. It's awesome to see such a great turnout here. I'd like to start by introducing our Chief Economist, Cameron Bagrie. Many of you may already know of Cameron through his media presence, but for those of you who don't, Cameron is one of New Zealand's leading economists, ex-Chief Economist of ANZ and Managing Director of Bagrie Economics. So we're really privileged to have Cameron on our team, helping our clients and our team members keep up to date with economic trends. So before I hand over to Cameron, I'd just like to briefly explain why we engaged a chief economist, because it's quite unusual for our industry to do this. So at Mallet McLean, we believe in empowering people to build smarter, better businesses. Most accounting firms are focused on the past. But for us, we believe that building a smarter, better business is about looking forward. So we facilitate this each and every day through the business planning and coaching services that we provide to our clients. And having Cameron on board helps us to provide even more valuable insights to our clients to help them think ahead in their business. And why Cameron? Well, as his LinkedIn profile says, and no doubt you'll see today, he's a straight shooter. And at Mallet McLean, one of our core values is candor. We believe in talking straight and saying it as it is. So we feel that Cameron is a great fit for our brand and our culture. So whether you're a current client, a future client, a professional, or just a local business looking for some valuable insights today, we hope you go away with some valuable information that you can take away in your business to build a smarter, better business. So with that, I'll hand over to Cameron.
Look, thanks. I've got some good news and I've got a whole lot of other news. Yesterday, one of the groups that I spoke to was Fletcher Building. So that was an interesting discussion. I started off with saying, well, I'm not going to be any more upbeat than the results that you just delivered. But look, congratulations to Mallet McLean for what they've done here. And it's not just about engaging me, it's what they're thinking about in regard to the future. And if I look at New Zealand at the moment, we're at a pretty delicate inflection point where things could go really well if we're bold and we've got the leadership to embrace a whole lot of change, or things could go really bloody pear-shaped. And beyond my Bagrie Economics hat, I sit on a few boards. I've got a few other companies. I've got one company called Chaperon helping businesses with banks, because guess what? Banks are a bit difficult. There's a flip side to banks being difficult, is that maybe there's a few problems out there in regard to business acumen. And we actually need to improve businesses' bankability, and businesses learn a bit about managing risk. Put a bit of effort into those applications. I'm on the board of New Zealand Apple and Pear. I joined the board in December 2022. The shit hit the fan about 6 weeks later. I'm on the board of Life Education New Zealand, so I see a fair bit in regard to what's going on in regard to education across New Zealand, and I challenge anybody in this room to pick a better barometer as to where New Zealand is going to be in 30 years than the education attainment and achievement levels we're seeing within the schooling system today. Because I have a look across this room, a lot of you 20 to 30 years ago were sitting in school, and now you're the business owners, and you sort of think about the feeder system, tomorrow's business owners or tomorrow's group of workers. And now I call Friday Good Luck Friday, as in good luck getting a whole lot of people to turn up to work, because they tend to not to. And if you're not attending school, guess what? You're probably not going to be too great at actually turning up to work. And then another board that I sit on, and I've got some crackers, is the New Zealand Police Welfare Fund. And you can imagine some of the stories that I get in regard to what's going on across New Zealand, or some of the stuff that they're attending to. The more clever, smarter criminal behaviour that we're starting to see relative to 10 years ago. We're starting to see a younger generation of gangs that are coming through that anything goes. You know, the old mob and the Black Power were never great people, but at least they had certain rules. You didn't do certain stuff. Yeah, the younger generation, like hell, it's all on. Yeah, so, and this comes back to New Zealand at the moment being very heavily fractured. Look, if you want to think about the big picture, yeah, I'm going to start with some broader concepts about where New Zealand sits at the moment, and then we'll sort of get into Nelson. And within Nelson, yeah, you're somewhat lucky in regard to you got a lot more natural strategic opportunities you can unlock. Yeah, you just go stand outside there for a start and you think about this thing called sunlight, water resources, all this sort of stuff. But if you look at where we sit both globally and across New Zealand at the moment, we're almost like in a boxing match. And challenge number one is this thing called inflation. And I know the Reserve Bank didn't lift interest rates yesterday. ANZ sort of went out in a bit of a limb with a brave call, and they got egg on their face. But inflation is still a problem. Yeah, and it's ruthless. And how much do you think your rates bill is going to go up in the next 5 years? Because I would pick a number between 50 and 100%. Yeah, some councils, Hamilton City, has put a 20+% number on the table. That they've got it's fundamentally broken. Yeah, but think about your energy costs. Think about insurance. Yeah, these are things that are not economically sensitive, but they're just going to add a little bit more to inflation. And at the same time, talk to anybody in the construction sector. Yeah, we're starting to see a bit less work, so people are starting to get a little bit more aggressive, sharper with pricing. But there's still an undercurrent of price increases that are coming through, and the more mad we go in regard to things like safety. And I'm up in Auckland half the time, and they've invested 500,000 in these speed bumps, these pedestrian crossings. About 140,000 of the cost was in traffic safety. Right? Yeah. If you nominated 10 firms for the fastest growing firms in New Zealand over the past 5 years, 5 of them would have to be involved in traffic management because they're everywhere. And I was on a farming show yesterday, and I just picked up my phone and someone's just put out on Twitter, quote of the year goes to Cameron Bagrie, because I made reference to the fact we might now have more road cones than sheep in the country. And we've got an awful lot of sheep. But we've got to get rid of inflation. And getting rid of inflation, there is not a fancy playbook, right? To get rid of inflation, you have to beat the economy up. I'd love to say there was a different way to go about it, but that's the basic playbook. So what we are in at the moment is what's called the unders stage of the economic cycle, where things are going to be tough. And 2023 was the appetizer on the main course. Now, we don't like inflation, we don't like the solution, there's a bit of medicine on the other side. What we're also navigating at the moment is these real complex web of structural changes. We've underinvested in the roading network across successive governments, the same with the healthcare system, the same with education. We need to decarbonise the economy. We need to manage a lot better asset portfolios, and this includes central government, local government. I think there's a big shake-up that's starting to take place across firms in New Zealand, because guess what? When the tide goes out, you find out who's been swimming naked. And suddenly a whole lot of people on some listed companies, maybe they actually weren't that good at running big businesses. And this is actually a good thing. Let's get rid of a whole lot of crap, and we go through this thing called a reset. But resets are hard, because what we've also got in this middle is this thing called populism. And populist behaviour drives politicians, leaders, to make short-term decisions as opposed to long-term decisions. And the same thing goes on across listed companies. This is where being a small to medium-sized enterprise, you've actually got a bit of a comparative advantage because you've got a lot more flexibility and manoeuvrability. If you're a business, a big business, you're captured by the earnings cycle every 3 to 6 months. You need to just deliver the numbers that the market's expecting. You don't see them sit back and think about where do we really want to be in 3 to 5 years' time. Those are the real strategic leaders. When I was at the National Bank, Sir John Anderson taught us, look after the staff because the staff looked after the customer. If the customer's looked after, well, the bank's going to make a lot of money, and we did. It almost feels nowadays like we've flipped it on its head. We're looking after the shareholder first, and people have gone down to the bottom of the pile. And I know we've got one of New Zealand's biggest problems at the moment is division. Whether you look at employers, employees, rural versus urban, the whole treaty debate, whether you own a house, whether you don't, landlord versus renters. We're going hammer and tong at each other. If we want to bring New Zealand economically and within society back together, in my view, we've got to take people back to the top of the pile. And this is not just about throwing money around and paying them a whole lot more. It's about general appreciation, but it's actually embracing a long-term interpretation of what's called capitalism. Capitalism's still the right model, but think about what you're doing over a 5-year window as opposed to the next 6 to 12 months. And we're starting to see those shifts. Big picture, part 2. Put your hand up if you're under the age of 50. Most of the room. Right. If you're under the age of 50, odds are you were not in the workforce from the 1990s, 2000s period. Now, if you ever look at what we've been used to for 20 to 30 years, this has been what we've experienced. We've experienced a world that's been pretty friendly. We saw the emergence of China as an economic powerhouse. And of course, China took a lot of our stuff, more and more, but China became the manufacturing epicenter around the globe of producing stuff, and it was cheap, and they could get it to us pretty efficiently, and we on-sold the stuff. But we didn't see too many accidents globally, or didn't see too many countries going hammers and tong at each other. We're in an environment where we called it the Great Moderation, low inflation and low economic volatility, and there was a trend over 30 years, and the trend was interest rates lower and lower. Interest rates go down, guess what? Asset prices go up. So asset prices moved up on average, house prices, including down in this region, 7.3, 7.5% every year. The playbook was house prices are going to double every 10 years. Why? Interest rates just went down. So yields went down, asset prices go up. We underinvested in infrastructure. It was a model that was all power to the employers, which is a fancy way of saying that worker compensation didn't keep up with where it actually needed to be. We saw rising inequality. That's what happens when house prices grow at 7.5%, and incomes grow at 4.5%. House prices go up to be 7, 8, even more times a multiple of median household income. I saw Chris Bishop out the other day saying we're going to get that number back to 3 to 5%. Odds of that taking place in the next 20 to 30 years, 0. To get house prices as a share of income down to, let's say 4, you've got to see household incomes grow up 4.5% for 20 years, and you've got to see house prices grow below the rate of inflation. Probability, 0. It is not going to take place, right? So we might be able to do it in 40 years, but it took us sort of 30 years to stuff the property market up, so it's going to take equally as long to improve it on the other side. Yet we've been in a world, though, where it's been stable, it's been a world of abundance. We were just depleting resources around the globe, running what's called a just-in-time model. And our leaders were leaders even though they were political. Yeah, we had good ones, we had bad ones, but yeah, by and large, hits and misses, it wasn't too bad. You ever look at what's going on at the moment around the globe? China, Taiwan. Now, America and China are going at it hammer and tongs. America is trying to slow down China's economic advancement through what's called a chip choke strategy, because the chips control the computers and the computers control the machines, and a lot of machines are necessary for armaments. This is modern warfare. What's going on in Gaza, who knows where that's going to end up, but it doesn't look to me like Israel is going to back off. We're seeing Russia and the Ukraine. Globally, for 30 years, we've been used to a rules-based society or conformity. What we're now starting to see, whether it be internationally or even down here, think about your own kids, is that power is starting to challenge rules. And we've encouraged that, and now all of a sudden we might have opened the door a little bit too far because it's starting to backfire. But it's happening at a massive global stage. Inflation, most people in this room have not seen, and not seen what it takes to get rid of inflation. And economists talk too much about inflation. They do not talk sufficiently about what inflation means for business. And this is what inflation means for business. To get rid of inflation, you need to hit margins. Margins is what you buy something for versus what you sell it on the other side. It's at the epicenter of business health. You lose margin, it goes straight to the bottom line. And part of the disinflation process is that businesses need to act as a compression variable where costs go up and finally people are not prepared to pay the final price on the other side. And you've been seeing the earnings reporting stuff that's coming out of listed companies in New Zealand, more and more. Same thing's happening across SMEs. So every business out there at the moment needs to be thinking about how do they maintain, expand, or ensure the hit to margins is not going to be a knockout punch. And this is where you've got to get stuck into investing in technology, productivity, working both horizontally and vertically with product partners. If you do that for me, I can do that for you. But it all comes back to maintaining margins. You lose margins. This is what Fletcher Building, taking place with Fletcher Building, a lot of these other retailers. The problem is economists do not talk about margins, they talk about inflation. So businesses feel a bit disconnected with what's actually going on. We're now being forced to address legacy issues. We can't continue to kick the can down the road in regard to things like 3 Water, and guess what? It's going to cost. And the bill is going to be phenomenal. Glass half full, there's going to be work for Africa in regard to infrastructure for a long time to come. But at the end of the day, someone pays the price. Inequality in my mind is now morphed into fragmentation and crime. The more you push against the laws of economics, the more that you disenfranchise some parts of society, the more you start to see kickback. And what we're starting to see across New Zealand at the moment is an awful lot of kickback. Abundance has now been replaced by scarcity, or using resources a lot more efficiently, and by efficient I'm meaning in a sustainable basis. Just in time is now just in case. Just get me the stuff. If you're a builder and you can't get items on site, and you've got a team of 4 on site twiddling their thumbs, not doing anything, it costs you a lot of money. That's one of the lessons of COVID. We're now in this world of rapid change where 1 + 1 now equals 11, or as my daughter tells me, it also equals a window dad. But we've been used to slow and steady adaptation. Now, we're off to the races on everything under the sun, and if anything goes wrong technology-wise in my house, my 14-year-old is fixing it, not me, because I do not have a clue about how to do this. Need to get something lined up on my phone. Sophie, can you please go away and do that? And part of it's because I'm getting a bit older and the old eyesight now. And political leadership is now being based what can only be described as a whole lot of populist-driven rubbish. We do not have the political leaders of yesteryears. The last political leader that I think of that had real substance around the globe was Angela Merkel. Now we're dealing with people such as Donald Trump. I spoke to someone from the UK the other week, and they were keen to poke fun at American politics. And I said, well, hang on, didn't you have this guy called Boris? So just be careful what you say about everybody else. We are now going through a big reset, and we're going through this reset at a time, one of our biggest problems, I think, is division. So if we look at the election result last year, the National and the Labor Party got 65% of the vote. Now, one of the reasons was you didn't like the incumbents and you weren't quite sure about whether the blue crowd were actually the right lot to actually take us through what needs to take place. So we saw a lot more votes go out to the far left and the far right. We're seeing that exact same dynamic around the globe. And it's a reflection of division. Is that people are looking at the moment and thinking, this doesn't look right. Who's got the kudos, who's got the plan to actually bring New Zealand back together? And I can guarantee we are going to see a whole lot of marches disruption in the next 2 to 3 years that is going to make groundswell look like they're a bunch of teddy bears. And that's the reality, that we don't like to talk about it, but it is going to take place because there is a nasty undercurrent across New Zealand at the moment that is a lot more active in regard to how they're thinking, and they are pissed. And this, we need a government that's going to bring New Zealand back together. At the same time, we've got all these challenges. Inflation, it's coming down, but inflation is still, headline inflation is 4.7. The target is 2. We're 2.7 times away from the target. The current account is in excess of 7% of GDP. Ironically, what does that tell us? We spend too much and we earn too little. We need to actually learn how to earn a dollar. Fancy that. Earning a dollar before you spend a dollar. Economics is not hard. Your regions such as Nelson, Marlborough, your Tasmans that have got a unique strategic advantage, we need to get behind the farmers because New Zealand's a centre of excellence in regard to food, and I know we've got climate change problems, etc., but we cannot continue to borrow and spend beyond our means. Education attainment is a big problem. 47% of kids regularly attend school. 20% of Maori Pacific Island kids attend school less than 70% of the time. It is a phenomenal number in regard to the kids. And some of this is a reflection of inflation. The kids don't go to school because they've got to stay home and either look after young ones or else they've actually got to go out there and they take a second job because mum and dad can't put food on the table. This is the stuff particularly we're seeing up in Auckland. The state of the New Zealand's healthcare system has been declared a crisis. Infrastructure too. Your local authority finances, I'm not quite sure what's going on down here with your lot, but I suspect it's pretty similar to what's going on across the country, is that they've got a pretty poor state of finances and you've got an asset portfolio that hasn't been managed properly, so you've got a pretty huge deferred liability, and at some stage you're probably going to get some councils together. And we've tried that before from memory down here, and it went down like a lead balloon. But when you go through these things called economic resets, guess what? I start to get excited. Just have a look at these are some headlines we've seen in the past couple of weeks. Right? I've looked at this and I thought, hallelujah, because last year we were kicking the can down the road. It was almost like we didn't want to make the obvious decisions because we knew what was coming. Oh no, we'll defer that. Well, now, if Fletcher Building, guess what? There needed to be a clean out. You're going to see another couple of listed companies deliver some earnings numbers in the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks, and I reckon there's going to be calls for at least one board chair to go. I won't name the company, but this is what happens. And it's part of a necessary process to actually reset and rebuild back better. And that's a bloody overused phrase, I shouldn't use it, but resets offer these opportunities. And what we're seeing is that a whole lot of people, to be honest, have been involved in positions. People I sit on boards with, people don't read the board papers. They turn up and they go through Board Pro and they've got absolutely no idea what's going on within the board meeting because they haven't read the stuff. We call them passengers. It's time for the passengers to disappear. A whole lot of people advising councils or a whole lot of people that sit on councils, either be a leader and do something, but don't just sit there and be an antagonist. Don't be a populist. You're going to disappear in the wash. So we're starting to see that reality is starting to sink in. And it's unfortunate, but you need to dig yourself in a hole, a deeper hole, before you start to embrace the need for change. And that's actually what's taken place. It's just taken a little bit longer. When things break, in my view, you go back to a little bit of basics. And it doesn't matter whether you talk about a small business, a big business, the New Zealand economy as a whole, or the Nelson Tasman region, right? You want to flourish, you got to ask 4 or 5 key questions. Number one, what do we have that's unique? Is it a service proposition? Is it some fancy tech gadget? Is it the way we go about business within culture? Is it strategic resources? Is it water? But what do we have that we can wrap an economic plan around that means people are going to want what we do as opposed to what someone else does? It's real business basic. And you do that regionally, you do it nationally, you do it layer by layer across business. Once you identify what that is, you get the fundamentals right. You try to link into global themes. So I'll give you a global theme at the moment. A big global theme at the moment is trade and economics is being replaced by the security of trade. And it's security in 3 areas: food, energy, and technology. Now, food plays into our strength. Energy, we've got a strategic weakness on. And it's a big point of vulnerability, and shutting Marsden Point was a big mistake. And we're going to need to fix that mistake. Not quite sure how. But New Zealand's going to get knocked around by climate change, but New Zealand is going to come relatively better out of climate change than a whole lot of other countries, because we can manage risks around climate change if we can harness the power of water, storage, irrigation. But these are some of the conversations we need to have. Then you need to get the right people in the right place. Get rid of the passengers. I cannot emphasise enough the importance of having quality people and pay them in the right places. And while we're talking about education, we are not going to fix the education system unless we pay teachers an awful lot more money. Because in my view, they are the caretakers, they are the guardians of New Zealand's economic future. And we do not remunerate them for that responsibility. Caveat: if we're going to remunerate teachers, we're going to measure your performance at the same time. They go hand in hand. There's no free lunch. And then you've got to ruthlessly drive innovation. You've got to be able to adapt to change. I jumped onto ChatGPT the other day and said, write an article on commercial property in the style, language of Cameron Bagrie. Because people call them Bagrieisms. Because there's just these choices of phrase. And what it spat back at me was absolutely frightening. I was like, whoa. Yeah, but that's basic business economics in regard to what we need to see. And then you can break it down into export markets, capital, you know, and we don't have New Zealand's capital markets, capital system right. You know, we lend too much money on houses and not enough money to business. And it's a structural problem at the moment. It's one of the reasons I set up Chaperon, helping businesses navigate banks. And when you go from ignorance to reality to finally we're starting to see a little bit of substance. And what we saw about 10 days ago, I saw the Prime Minister, what he described water as an absolute priority in regard to unlocking the potential. It's one of the few times I wrote an article and I put it out in Business Desk, and the story or the theme of the article was finally we're moving beyond cancel policy, i.e. we're going to cancel every single thing the previous government wanted to do. So now we're going to bring in some proactive stuff. Hallelujah. About bloody time. You know, you're only about day 85 out of your 100-day plan. But this is where we're starting to move into as we realise we've got one hell of a big repair job. And you've been really lucky down here because you've got a dam coming online, and you can probably thank you know, Nick Smith and a whole lot of others for that. But there's plans around the country in the Hawke's Bay for doing exactly the same thing. People tell me that things are pretty tough, and I say, really? Motor vehicle sales are not going well. Caravan sales, spa pools, that sort of stuff. Well, put not doing well in a sense of perspective compared to what you were doing in 2020, 2021 and 2022. You knocked the ball out of the park. Well, now it's just becoming a little bit more normal, isn't it? You know, people don't go out and they replace the car every 2 years. You know, so the more that we load it up in those 2 years, the more you're going to see a little bit of a timing lag before the market starts to come back. But if you ever look at just a simple economic indicator such as bank non-performing loans, and every month I see an outfit gets out there that talks about how many people have missed their mortgage payments. Well, the bank data or the bank earnings reports are not telling me that bad story. Yeah, bank non-performing loans are 0.5, 0.6% of total loans. Have a look at the chart on the right-hand side, which compares bank non-performing loans as of the end of last year compared to what we were seeing in 2010. Like chalk and cheese. Yeah, and there is some stress that's starting to see coming through the system, but we're coming off a pretty healthy level at the moment. Caveat, have we got on top of inflation yet? The answer is no. So we know the economic climate is not going to get an awful lot better in 2024. So the numbers will keep moving up. Inflation's the top priority, and there's reasons to be optimistic. We've got AI, productivity boom, particularly out of the United States. Any firm that is not embracing AI or looking at what it can do is at risk of getting desperately behind the curve. Supply chains have improved relative to what they were 2 years ago. China's exporting deflation. Governments are now facing borrowing constraints, and guess what? You lift interest rates, all of a sudden people can't eat out as much. That building consent that was in, people decide, no, we're not going to go ahead with that process. This is the stuff that we're starting to see on the ground at the moment. Unfortunately, there's a flip side, is that inflation's come down from 7% to 4.7. There's a whole lot of reasons to suggest inflation might struggle to go back to 2. Climate change carries an inflation cost. Globally, we're seeing like this rolling wall of supply shocks. All these ships that are now no longer going through the Red Sea, they're going around the Cape of Good Hope. Mother Nature drought has meant the Panama Canal is operating at about 2/3 capacity in regard to the number of ships that are coming through. So there's all these sort of complications. Demographics, the baby boomers, demographics mean for a long time that people have been, during their working life, you tend to save. for your retirement. There is now close to 900,000 people in New Zealand of retirement age in the next 12 months. And mortgage rates are up around 7. And the Reserve Bank knows this, and that's one of the reasons yesterday they decided we don't think we need to do too much more or anything more. Yeah, so, and this comes back to your monetary policy's punch is not over. Yeah, we are still going to see some difficulties this year. Dairy sector debt servicing per kg of milk solid, I think it's going up to $2. Yeah, farm inflation has gone from 16% down to about 4 to 5%, and people look at it, oh, that's pretty good. Well, yeah, your costs in 2 years are up 20%. Yeah, 4% is still a reasonably solid number, but it's less than bad than 16. And yeah, our biggest trading partner at the moment is in the headlines. Yeah, go to Bloomberg, Reuters. Constantly you see about Evergrande or these entities. China's been building a lot of houses, too many houses. They've got an economic model that's under serious pressure, and of course China takes an awful lot of our exports. China and Australia are the big two, and China's pretty relevant for Australia. So we saw 12 months ago there was a lot of pressure across the dairy sector. Dairy prices coming down. It looks like China's come back buying in the market. So there's a bit of a lesson in that, and the lesson is that we're linked to China's economic fortunes, but we're probably less susceptible to China's economic direction because of what we supply China, i.e. food, and foods of that necessary variety, albeit we like to sell them the more expensive stuff too, and that can be sensitive to economic conditions. But we're watching really closely what's going on in China. It's election year, and the fun and games is starting well and truly. It looks like Donald Trump is going to get back in. Indonesia, which has got about a population of about 275 million, and we probably don't talk about countries like Indonesia enough in regard to what we can put into that country. We put a whole lot of apples into places such as Vietnam. These are huge nations when it comes to population, and we only need to serve less than 1% of the real wealthy. But Lord forbid if Donald Trump gets back in, because if you think New Zealand's got problems in regard to division, go visit America and see what's going on up there. And it's frightening to think that they've got the choice between Sleepy Joe and a guy that's basically a crook. Now, no matter who gets back into power, whether it be Sleepy Joe or whether it be Donald Trump, I think you're going to see a lot of people that want to come to New Zealand. And we know regions such as Nelson benefits immensely from inward migration. So Donald gets in, there's a whole lot of Democrats just say, I'm out of here. If Donald doesn't get back in and it's Sleepy Joe, there's a whole lot of Republicans said, I can't stomach this, I'm gone. And suddenly, old New Zealand, despite having our own select economic prospects, challenges, actually looks pretty good compared to what we're seeing around the globe. And the same sort of things going on in the United Kingdom. It looks like they're going to see a change of government. The new government, we've seen a big jump in business confidence. I suspect business confidence, we're going to get another number in about 2 hours. I suspect business confidence is going to be less euphoric because reality seems to be sinking in, but the business sector tends to like the blue hooey and doesn't like the red hooey. Does it bear any relationship with economic growth? The answer is no. But we print the numbers anyway. The figures that I keep an eye on are what firms are saying about profits, what they're saying about employment, are firms investing. They're what's called the substance indicators. And what we know at the moment is that end of last year there was a lot of hope. It was almost like this new government was going to throw a whole lot of fairy dust on the economy and everything, all those problems we've got, we're going to magically disappear. You know, you got to beware magic potions, because magic potions tend to be snake oil. You know, with each passing day, and you also saw the announcement the other day about education, about all these buildings, 350, schools around New Zealand have now had their fit outs, hit paused. There's $4.3 billion worth of education building consents have been in the pipeline or issued in the last 3 years. Now you can guarantee with inflation, the real cost of completing those buildings is probably $5.5 to $6 billion. And Nicola, they were going to get off the hook, and they weren't going to be on the hook for paying a lot more for these projects that have been put in the pipeline. Roading inflation is 30% in the past 3 years. Everything is blowing up in regard to cost escalation. The impossible trinity. The impossible trinity is what I use to describe the challenges that the Minister of Finance is facing. You want to deliver tax relief, and she's doubled down on that. You don't want to cut government services. You want to be investing in infrastructure. You don't want to come across as an overly austere government. And of course, you want to show you're financially responsible. You want to go from deficit to surplus as quick as you can. You don't want to borrow too much money. You can be on one side of the triangle. You can hit 2 out of 3 is possible. 3 out of 3 is mathematically impossible. Now, I think it is very obvious where we need to be. And if it was me, I'd be picking that side of the triangle. And I'd be prioritising infrastructure spend. We all know this is where they want to be. And I look at it and I cannot get my head around the idea that we need to be dishing out tax cuts at the moment. Not when we've got problems of this magnitude across healthcare, education and infrastructure. And you don't see the full extent of it in the South Island. You've got to go up and experience driving from the likes of Taupo to Auckland and how long that stretch of road now takes and the inefficiencies that it puts into just wasting time. Imagine, I drive it occasionally, but imagine being a truck driver, driving up and down that sort of stretch of road regularly. The damage that's been done to vehicles now, because the roading network has got a whole lot of potholes. And we can't blame the previous government for that. You've got to go back and have a look at who was in government prior to the previous lot. Yeah, so a lot of the challenges we've got are covered successive government. Local authorities, I'll just give you some numbers in regard to local authorities in aggregate. Local authorities need to raise rates by about 10 to 15% just to get back to zero for their budgets, because at the moment they're running big deficits. As interest rates move up, guess what? Your interest bill goes skyward. So there's another 5% increase in rates that you need to fund. Central government funding of local authorities' income has gone from 12% of their income to 19%. I don't think it'll be maintained at 19% because central government is cutting back funding as well. And what we saw with the Auckland Regional fuel tax, where they just said, no, you're not getting that money, I think will manifest in other areas. And this is before we talk about 3 water costs. And we do not have a plan yet. What we do know with reasonable certainty is that if central government puts money into people's pockets via tax relief, local government is going to take that money right out of your pocket on the other side. Yet the tax burden as a share of GDP is not going down. Now, I don't have a problem with that as long as we're using the money smartly on the other side and delivering outcomes. You know, I would have no problem paying more tax if it was giving outcomes. And that's the challenge, because you've got a bureaucracy, a sector that doesn't like measuring outcomes. Turning just to Nelson, a few things about Nelson. One, Nelson for the past 10 odd years has struck an eerie resemblance to the performance of the New Zealand economy as a whole. It's almost like how they measure the Chinese economy. Yeah, the number just needs to be here. That looks close enough. But yeah, what do we know across New Zealand at the moment? The housing market's stabilised. Is the housing market roaring back? The answer is no. You've still got to work to actually do a deal. But we're actually seeing the buyers and the sellers have the buyers were in control in 2022, 2023. So prices dropped, and now we're starting to see a few more transactions. The commercial property market, there's still a big gap between the buyers and the sellers. Yeah, the buyers can't get the finance to buy where the cap rates are that the vendors expect. So there's no transactions. The buyers are going to win that debate. The volume of building work coming through the pipeline is tailing off sharply. It actually worries me when I see some of those decisions coming out of Wellington. And to be fair, it was obvious there was something going seriously wrong with that college in Marlborough. So financial oversight will be a problem. But inflation just adds to the cost, and you can't get away with it in regard to what's going on. Retailing is really tough. People are tightening the belt. And for a lot of people, the old Uber Eats generation, the idea of not eating out 3 to 4 times a week is quite foreign. For most of us, eating out 3 to 4 times a week is the foreign part. That just seems completely normal. There's a lot of migrants that are running around. To be fair, though, a lot of them are crammed into not too many residences. And that's not a great advertisement for New Zealand-India relationships in regard to getting a free trade agreement. Costs are hurting business performance. The rural chequebook has been shut. I'm starting to pick up a few more positive vibes out of the rural sector in the past 2 to 3 months. The pip fruit industry is actually performing remarkably well, all things considered. The increase in the dairy payout is coming through, helping out the dairy farmers. It's still a bit of a struggle for the red meats. Sentiment across kiwi fruit has bounced up a bit as well, and unemployment's moving up, but it's moving up slowly. If you look at migration, migration's a big driver of growth. It's what we call the bums on seats economic model. So we've let in 127,000 people into the country on the face of it in the last 12 months. Caveat, something looks like it's going on, because a whole lot of New Zealanders have actually gone on holiday overseas, and normally you go on holiday overseas and there's a slight mismatch between departures and people that come back. That number in the past couple of years has been in excess of 150,000 a year. And you sort of ask, are we measuring this correctly? Because where are they? Now maybe they're on a big extended holiday because we got locked up for a long time. But there just seems to be something a little bit odd that's going through the numbers. And in fact, stats don't physically count or measure New Zealanders that are parking. They actually use the machine-based algorithm to guesstimate it. And I look at through, if you want to plan for a region in regard to growth, if you want to plan for an economy, there's one thing you need to be on top of, and that number you need to be on top of is your population. Right? It defines how many houses you need, all this sort of stuff. We're not on top of that number. One thing that people do not keep a close enough eye on is what's called internal migration. External migration is the flow of people in and out of New Zealand. There's also a huge flow of people internally. So I'll give you one region for an example. Auckland loses 10 to 15,000 people every year into the regions. These are New Zealanders that just say, I've had enough of Auckland, I'm out of here. And they go to the southern parts of Northland, and they go into Cambridge's, and Cambridge is absolutely knocking the ball out of the park. So much so that Waikato Economic Development tends to take a bit of a lazy approach. We don't need to do anything because all these Aucklanders are just going to come down here and live. And that's been their economic model. And to be fair, it's probably a little bit similar to Tasman. But we're seeing this across all of New Zealand. So Wellington City's losing people to Kapiti Coast. Why? Weather. 2, motorway. 3, working from home. Same thing's going on with Masterton. Even places such as Levin are starting to benefit from this sort of stuff. Christchurch City, losing people to the Waimak, losing to Selwyn. Yeah, we can talk about intensification, all this sort of stuff till the cows come home, and yeah, okay, we can do a bit of that stuff. People actually want a piece of land to build a house so the kids can run around and have a good time. And it worries me, some of the stuff that we've been building across New Zealand, and you don't really see it down here, but some of the stuff we see up in Auckland, it's just rubbish. Yeah, it's like you can only have a very small car because there's insufficient parking on these blocks for the cars. Yeah, we're building houses, we're not building communities. And we've got to get back to building communities. One of the things that I keep an eye on is growth in the number of businesses. You know, I love these reports, and I won't name the outfit, but I did a speaking event last night, and he said, oh, Takapuna's going really well. We've had 5% growth in the last 12 months, according to this economic report. I said, I'll call bullshit to that. And he said, why is that? I said, well, the New Zealand economy was in recession last year, and you're telling me Takapuna got 5% growth? Oh no, the numbers are up to March 2023. Well, wow. Yeah, I think the back half of last year and the early part of this year is completely different. And if you want an indicator in regard to where momentum is going, just look at the number of businesses that are being created relative to deaths. Now you look at traffic volumes across the region. Now you look at school enrolments to give an idea about population growth. There's a whole lot of economic indicators that you can grab. The number of people that are sign up with their electricity companies, the number of meters that have been put in. There's a whole lot of really timely indicators that you can use to give an idea about where you're going through an economic development lens, i.e. the future, as opposed to an economic monitoring lens. This is what happened 6 months ago. The problem is economic development has become economic monitoring. And we need to pivot and switch. Just be aware, when you look at enterprise count numbers, they can give you a signal that's not necessarily the right signal. So if you look at the number of businesses that are associated with agriculture in New Zealand, there's fewer businesses involved in agriculture, which on the face of it you think, God, that doesn't look like a good economic story. That story is about consolidation. Yeah, the sector is seeking to get a bit of scale. Yeah, so you've got to get a bit of common sense interpretation around what's going on. Building work nationally, and once again I had an interesting conversation with Fletcher Building Management yesterday in regard to what they're seeing. But you're seeing exactly the same thing here in the region, particularly in Tasman. The number of building consents has fallen off a cliff. Now, this is a national phenomenon. And some of it is, or at least one of the reasons the property market in New Zealand has stabilised is because of what we call Tobin's Q. And this is Tobin's Q. Construction costs are up 20% in the last 2 years. The value of houses dropped 15%. That's a 35 percentage point swing in favour of buying an existing house over building a new one. So guess what people have done? You can't build the property for what you can go down there and buy the existing stock. And that's people will point to migration, interest rates and access to credit as to the reason as to why the property market stabilised. It's this other variable, it's called economic sense. Economics is not hard in regard to what's gone. Affordability is still an issue. Look, I'd love to have a good story for the construction sector, but as I told Fletcher Building yesterday, you're a three-speed sector. Your 3 speeds are fifth, neutral and reverse. Yeah, when the economy's going well, construction goes really well. Construction is one of those sectors, like retailing, that suffers more than others when you go through a disinflation process. A strong construction sector is completely inconsistent with getting rid of inflation. So the work pipeline in that sector needs to be lower, not stronger. If the work pipeline is stronger, Adrian Orr needs to lift interest rates. Now the construction sector will come back, and there will be different work. It'll be more of the infrastructure, the long-term investment stuff. But people just need to think. Opportunities. Quite often we think about resets. We lose sight of the fact that out of resets, you create something a bit better. Here's a few themes. We're starting to see globally as trade and security comes more to the fore. People are starting to think about resilience of supply chains, bringing manufacturing capability back home. Is New Zealand ever going to be a manufacturing powerhouse? No. Is there some stuff we can do? The answer is yes. Manufacturing has been in trend decline for 30 years. We've outsourced everything. That is now a point of vulnerability. Now, this is one of the reasons industrial properties perform better than retail and office, because there's a strategic theme there behind the scenes that might support it over a 20-year story. I'm really surprised Employers and Manufacturers Association has not been swinging from the chandeliers saying, talk to us. There's a big global theme here. This is what we can do to make sure we can do manufacturing not completely competitively, but we're not going to be excessively uncompetitive. Climate change, as I said earlier, I think it's going to play into New Zealand's hands, because other countries are going to get their food production cycles are going to go absolutely haywire. And food security is a very pressing issue. The issue is that we've got to work out, if we give you security of supply, we want a higher price, because that's how it works. But we're not having those conversations at the moment. The tyranny of distance is now an advantage. Interesting to see what we're seeing down in Queenstown in regard to the talk about this tech hub. Just an example about boutique sort of things that can take place to bring things together. And you got to ask the old question, what could Nelson do? And remember that page I showed you in regard to what do we have that's unique? What are our comparative advantages? You start with that sort of footprint, and you bring out a strategic plan around it. So the upshot, throw out your historical playbook. I don't think the next 10 to 20 years are going to be like the last 10 to 20. Brace for a lot more economic volatility. The fun to running a business is coming back. And people look at me when I say that like I'm smoking that stuff that Chloe Spoolbrook promotes. What do you mean it's going to be fun? We're going to find out who's any good in the next couple of years. The success of a deal or otherwise is not going to be because of the market. It's going to be what you or your business and your group have actually done. And I find that strangely satisfying, because I like to win when someone else loses. But that's capitalism, right? That's well-functioning economics. And the problem is that we've had too many winners for a long time. It's almost like everybody's been a winner. Sorry, that's not the way the game is played. We're going to need the strong to actually step up. So if you've got a good balance sheet, you'll be licking your lips looking at some stuff over the next 12 to 24 months, because we are going to see some distressed stuff. Now, you don't get rid of inflation from 4.7 to 2 by having happy days over 2024, 2025. If it's happy days, the OCR is going up further. It's real simple. Final thing, just to draw your attention back to, is two things. Look, one, I think we're at a very delicate inflection point. We've got to make some really big, bold decisions in the next couple of years. If we keep kicking the can down the road, it's going to feel like this economy is in detention for 10 years. And that's going to be too much fun. But what we also need is a policy framework that actually brings New Zealanders back together. That's my biggest concern, because when you get a divided society, it's not just a problem within society, it becomes economically unhealthy. And somehow we've got to fix that. And that's going to require real leadership and a different platform to what I'm seeing at the moment. So I'll stop there. Happy to take some questions, debate.
Cameron, you were talking about business succession being an issue. Were you talking about the wealth being retained within the business succession being families? Is that what you're talking about, or were you talking about something different?
A lot of, well, there's a whole lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of family-based succession issues, and there is some issues in regard to whether the next generation actually wants it. That's what I was going to say next. Not has got the capability to actually preserve and take it forward. Yeah, and there's that old sort of adage that you go through sort of 4 generations in regard to what goes on. And yeah, it's not a nice thing to say, but I think there's a strange sense of self-entitlement that's crept in around New Zealand and around the globe over the past decade. And we actually need tougher times just to break that stuff. I spoke at an event 6 months ago, and it was a listed company. And there would have been 10 people over the age of 35 in the room, or over the age of 30. It was unbelievable, right? And I started off with saying, I've got good news. You're going to learn more in the next 2 years than what you've learned in the last 10. The CEO just about fell off his chair. He loved that. But that's precisely where we sit at the moment. There's a whole lot of people that own businesses and they know what we're going to go through. And they're worried about, do I really want to go through this? I feel like I've done my time. Yeah, what's my exit strategy? How do I look after my management? The people that have actually been joined with me in regard to building this business over time? Is there possibility for a management buyout? There's a whole lot of stuff in that space.
Wages the next 12 months, what's to be expected for staff as an employer?
Right, so you got to break it down into different components. Right, so if I'm looking at what's called pure wage inflation, which is not total wage growth, because typically you see total wages will have a productivity, efficiency, experience dynamic in it as well. But if I have a look at wage inflation, we're going to see wage inflation track above general inflation. What we've seen for the past couple of years is that wage inflation has been below general inflation. What does that mean in practice? Inflation was 6-7. Yeah, wages were generally, wage inflation component was around 4 to 4.5. Yeah, as inflation comes down, and inflation is going to come down below 4, I think it's going to struggle to get below 3. I think we're going to still see wage inflation up around 4% for another couple of years. Purchasing power has been eroded, so there's going to be a little bit of catch up going forward. But it's a market where the world of shortages for labour is actually, there's a lot more floating around at the moment, and yeah, anecdotally, I'm seeing a lot of job losses of late. I thought we would have seen them pre-Christmas, but it's almost like people hoped that things were going to get better in 2024, and the hope hasn't come into reality.
So 5% plus considering performance and efficiencies, or less than 5?
I'd be trying to get away with less than 5 because I don't think there's too much product efficiency out there at the moment. If I have a look at productivity across New Zealand at the moment, it's negative.
Cameron, you talked about the infrastructure deficit. Do you think the government has got an appetite to spread that around the whole country? I mean, our region here, like many smaller regions, does suffer from roading issues where our hospitals are disgraced. I think we're reasonably okay as far as water goes. But if those projects came to being here, they would be quite a major boost for our local economy. Do you think the central government's going to spread it around?
Well, I'll give you just an example of why I suspect the answer is probably no. Shane Reddy, what's his seat? Whangarei, I think, from memory. Promised in the lead up to the election, we're going to have that new hospital in Whangarei. Yep, that hospital in Whangarei, we're going to get the new hospital. Gets elected, not in the first term. He's the health minister, right? And this comes back to what I said there earlier about, you know, the impossible trinity, where I'd like to see money spent. Because if you think about, through an economic lens, we tend to think about economic growth. How are we doing from day to day, from year to year? Is that the most important line? The answer is no. The most important line is not demand, it's the ability to meet demand. This includes being in business. It's delivering a customer experience so that buyer of your item comes back and buys an item again. That's what's called your supply side capacity. And what defines your supply side capacity of your business is productivity, your workers, your quality of your premises, your economy. You've got to have a well-functioning health system. You've got to have a roading network that gets stuff from A to B. You know, so tax cuts is stimulating demand. What we need to be doing is restoring some economic viability to the supply side capacity. Now that supply side capacity of New Zealand has been beaten up. It's not as efficient. It's a lot more costly being in business to get stuff from A to B. And guess what? Someone pays the price of that. So I know what I'd be doing. I'm not sure the Wellington lot. Agree.
You talk about security. What would be the effect if New Zealand's exports to China got disrupted?
Cash rate goes to 3%. That sounds good. It's not good. New Zealand dollar goes to 50.55. And now, is that a probable event or a possible event? It's a possible event. Yeah, at some stage, I think China will have a crack at Taiwan. Do we know with surety when that is going to be? The answer is no. But what we do know is that we've got huge reliance upon China. What we also know, if it came to a choice between Uncle Sam, i.e. Amazon, and Alibaba, and we needed to choose a side, I know which side we are choosing. And it ain't Alibaba. You know, despite the criticism that's directed at him, I think we've got the right gentleman to be Minister of Foreign Affairs at the moment. He's very good at that. And we need to play Switzerland over the coming few years.
Cameron, you touched on energy stability. How do you see that as a big issue? Or
It's massive. You know, energy is at the epicentre of what we do. If something happens in Southeast Asia, like if something happens around Singapore, we're in serious trouble. But it's not just energy, it's all the other ancillaries, the old fizzy drinks and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, we did not put a strategic risk management lens over the decision to close Marsden Point.
where is the strategy?
Well, that's a good question, because I'm not seeing a lot of it at the moment. You know, what I am seeing is an awful lot of cancel policy, and this is, I guess, why I was, jumping for joy when I finally saw some comments on water. I'm still waiting to see the outcomes. Yeah, we've seen examples in energy already, tasters, when you look at that jet fuel, that a whole lot of planes got grounded. You know, a few people around this room might remember carless days. Now, is that a probable event? No. Is it a possible event? The answer is yes. But the important thing here is that New Zealand now needs to rethink its strategy in regard to how we're thinking about foreign trade and foreign engagement. Because it's not just about trade and economics. It's trade and security. And we are vulnerable, but it could also be one of the biggest opportunities we've ever seen. If we can wrap up our food-based strategy into what's going on around the globe. and getting people to pay for that price, pay that extra price.
Cameron, who does the government rely on for their insight?
I worked at the New Zealand Treasury in the 1990s, and way back in the 1990s, Treasury was a pretty exciting place to be because you were genuinely thinking about what can we do to make New Zealand a better place. What we've seen over successive governments and a number of years is that I think the capability across the government sector has been run down, and we need to rebuild that capability.
You mean the quality of people?
Quality of people, yes. But what we've also seen is that this big move towards populism-driven politics and social media, this sort of stuff is accentuating it, and these politicians, they sit in dinners and they're on their goddamn Facebook and Instagram accounts, and they're out there getting these lovely shots in regard to turning up and saying a few words here and there. They're not doing the work of real productive lending. Secondly has been the decision by the Reserve Bank to get the banks to hold even more capital, because then they've just done even more lending on the low risk weighted asset. The third issue is just MB, and whether they've actually got people that have got any financial capability within their small business team, and the answer is no. And I know that because I've asked them the direct question and I've spoken to them about it. We've got some people that know a bit about financial markets. That's not what I asked. Who here has worked in a financial institution before? No one. I do not think that I think the government of the day does not understand banking, and the banking sector is very well organised, very influential, the Bankers Association, etc., etc. There's a big issue across the banks themselves in regard to their behaviour, chasing the short-term money as opposed to the long-term money. I have no problem with banks making a lot of money because they're big entities. I do have a problem with banks pricing for risk and not taking risk. That is the problem. And the media do not understand it. And they go to these various banking experts who work in academia, and they do not have the foggiest idea about what's going on in banks. So if you look at bank profits, they've compounded at about 15 to 17% per year. Over a 12-month period, banks have never made a loss. They've made losses over a 6-month period, but never in a year. So that's what's called alpha return without taking alpha risk. You go into a bank now, you want a business loan, they'll take security over your residential mortgage. And they take the high security, so they're not taking risk, but they're pricing for risk. That is the problem.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Cameron. It was really insightful. I think just taking away a bit from what you've said, that there's obviously a lot of pain out there in the economy, and there's more to come. But hope isn't a strategy. So now is that exciting opportunity for us as business owners, as professionals, to plan ahead and really show that we're good operators, and that we can build smarter, better businesses. So thanks a lot for everyone that's attended today. We've got some drinks and nibbles in the room next door and an opportunity for networking. So make your way over there, and thanks again.